been southbound, I've been hellbound, riding on the midnight train. Going too fast now, think I ought to slow down, standing in the pouring rain.
What's going on, guys? Tristan and Tony here with the One Hell of a Life Outdoor Podcast. What, you good?
I'm good. Let's go.
I thought your audio was...
No, I was doing that. I was doing just a F with you. So.
That's funny. What's going on, guys? So today we got one of our good friends, and really, I mean, somebody Tony's known for 30 plus years, and my whole life hunting, we've hunted with him, and he's really just a guy that knows a shit ton of information about deer, white-tailed deer. And Tony, go ahead and
I'll just tell you this: what we're going to cover today is some incredible stuff, and we might roll into a two-part if we get down too many rabbit holes. But you guys, especially if you're a young person, but anybody can do it, but if you're a young person and you want to be inspired by a story of somebody that has worked their ass off to live the American dream and go out and buy their own piece of property, that is a very, very nice piece of property, this is the podcast you need to listen to. Because I'll tell you what, Mike, that we're getting ready to introduce here, he's also a doctor by trade. So we have AKA'd him as Dr. Buck. And Dr. Buck will be here numerous times as we progress through the season, talk about what he's doing. But, man, Mike, thank you, dude. Thanks for taking time out with us tonight. And, dude.
Thanks for having me, guys.
I haven't seen you enough. Now we're on this podcast. It just hit me. I'm just like, I got him on this podcast, and it's been almost a year already.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah. But, man, thanks for taking time out tonight. I know you're busy as hell.
I was thinking earlier today, I was trying to remember the story of the time we met. We were hunting up in Saloma Springs State Park up in Illinois, and I was probably, 16 years old, I guess?
Yep.
15 years old. And
I think you were 15.
My dad was up there hunting with you for a few days, and he says, pull into the parking lot and go down this fire lane. I'm like, Dad, what the hell is a fire lane? I don't know what this is. He's like, yeah, the fire lane. I was like, okay. And as you're going to go straight, and then go left, and then go straight, and then go left, and then you'll find some trees. I'm like, well, Dad, I'm in the forest. Of course I'm going to find some trees. So I walked back there for like 30 minutes and plopped up next to a tree and waited till dark. And then that's when you came out of the woods, and it shot like an 8-point buck at the time. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Heck yeah, man.
Good time.
Heck yeah, dude. So, yeah, as Tristan prefaced, Mike and I have known each other for a long time. Michael's dad has been a long time bow hunter. Back in the day with, my stepdad, that we would consider a legend in bow hunting, local legend. Taught thousands of people how to shoot archery, and we've all just been part of that family, growing up, and it was based on public land hunting, which you've heard me talk about on the podcast before, dude, when we used to all get together for Thanksgiving or, and we all just hunted together. Everybody knew where everybody was hunting at and all this stuff, and we respected each other and just all hung out, and there was never no, I peed on this part of the property, so it's mine type of stuff, and, but, we all grew up together that way. And I just remember that when I first saw you that time, I had just gotten out of the Navy, and
yep.
And had my buddy Dave Hunt, hunting with us, and so that's when we really kind of started bonding the relationship. And where you really bonded with me, bro, was your dad had shot a deer, and he goes, Michael, go get the deer cart. And I go, what are you talking about, Michael? Go get the deer cart. I go, why didn't you bring the deer cart out here? He goes, I don't know. He goes, Michael runs cross country. And I go, are you shitting me? And he's like, no, dude. Did he look? It was like a 45, 50 minute good pace walk to get out.
It was probably at least a good 2 miles back in there is where we were.
Yeah,
at least.
Way out there. And he summons Michael to go get the rickshaw, dude. And I was like, he made it back so fast he must have been running barefooted. Because he was, dude, I think you made it back, dude, in like less than a half an hour.
Oh, it was quick.
It was stupid. And I was like, all right, I can get into this kid, but
Dude, I just love hearing like all the old stories and stuff, and really, I guess that's kind of why like deer hunting's probably still like my main love and first love. And one of the first times I remember, hanging out with Mike and you and Jerry and everybody was staying in Mike and Bill's camper the first weekend. The first deer I ever shot, I was 12 years old, and my dad brought me up to the park, and that was just an awesome weekend to be there and kind of experience.
Yeah, those were definitely good times, and without Jerry Dale, none of that would have ever happened.
No, he's influenced every single one of us from your. I mean, we might have a podcast called Jerry Dale.
A whole podcast on Jerry Dale.
Yeah, dude, and I'll invite everybody on the podcast like that we know, and give them like a couple minutes each. Just tell us your best Jerry Dale story, and by the time we get done with the podcast, y'all are gonna be going, "Some bitch, I don't know nothing about hunting." I mean, I don't, but no, we'll have to get into that sometime. But man, Mike and I have shared, tens of thousands of hours in the woods together. I mean, mostly blood trail and his dad's wounded deer, but
oh yeah, I mean,
no, but
between October and January, it would be at least 6-8 days, every month, and you're hunting all day long,
Wow.
A couple hours for lunch. But so, yeah, I mean, we spent a ton of time in the woods together.
And that's not counting all the prep, the scouting, everything else that we did, was.
Oh, yeah. Before season started. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of hours, and we've seen some pretty crazy shit along the way. I mean, some funny stuff, some tough stuff. But we'll probably dive into more of those stories, because honestly, we could do a whole podcast on Michael and Tony stories. I mean, we could, but man, dude, Mike, tell everybody a little bit about yourself professionally. Feel free to plug your biz if you want to. But tell everybody about you professionally, who you are as a personal guy, and a father and husband, and what kind of got you into deer hunting.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm a doctor by trade. I went to chiropractic school before medical school. I graduated chiropractic school back in 2003. Man, that's showing my age there, But and then I decided that I wanted to go back to medical school, and went almost immediately back into medical school and finished med school in 2009. And since then, I've been in either residency or practicing in my private practice. So I have a practice now that does mostly cash-based services for men and women. We offer hormone replacement therapy, and then I also work in the hospital setting as well. So I stay pretty busy with that, and I also have 4 kids. I'm married to my wife, she's an awesome wife. She lets me go deer hunting and duck hunting and kind of live some of my dreams too. So
that's awesome.
It's a good relationship. It's hard to find sometimes.
Yeah. No, there's no doubt about it. I mean, if I had Tanya on here right now, she'd say, I want to punch him in the face every day from like September 1st through February 28th. No, but that's awesome, man. And
well, I think it gets easier too. I think as you've been with somebody for a little while, they kind of respect the type of person you are, and then she's got things she likes to do, and I kind of stay out of her lane too, and let her do it. So
sure. So man, take us back, because I don't even know if I've even asked you this question before in all these years. What inspired you? What's the first thing you remember about, man, you was like, dude, I want to go deer hunting?
Well, to be honest with you, I don't want to say like forced into it.
Yeah.
But when I was a kid, my dad would always say, you want to go hunting? And I was interested in hunting. It wasn't that I wasn't interested in hunting.
Mm-hmm.
But, the first few times, if you're a kid and you're climbing up a tree and you're sitting there for 3, 4, 5 hours, whatever it is, it can get pretty boring. And this is before you had cell phones and before you had games. And I think we had a Game Boy, but I don't think I ever owned one of those. But it can get pretty boring. But the first time that I saw deer out of my tree stand was when it was a game changer. I was sitting there, probably God knows what, yanking my putt or whatever. I was probably 14 years old. and I had like 12 deer come in because it was late in the year, so they were kind of herding up. And after that, I was like, man, this is real, right? This could happen, you know. So I was like, this is actually pretty fun. Is
that a secret tip? By the way, I mean, does that draw them in? If
maybe. You never know. You should try it sometimes. Make sure there's no trail cameras on you or anything like that.
Anyway, continue. That's awesome.
No, that was really it. I mean, you know, when you first see some deer and first have some action, and you realize.
As waterfowlers, we experience all kinds of extreme weather conditions. Stay bone dry and warm with Frog Togs hunting gear. You can check them out at frogtogs.com or at frogtogshunt on Instagram.
Man, this is you know, your heart gets pumping and you get a release of some sympathetic nervous system, and you're like, this is it. This is addictive, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, man. That's awesome, you know, and I won't forget that first year, and I'm going to try not to go into too many stories, but you guys will be entertained by every bit of this, I promise. That, you know, I went up to Michael, I said, what kind of setup you got going on there, you know? And I just wanted to see what he had going on, and I went and looked at it, and I'm going to keep it very general, but it was not good. All right, it wasn't good. It wasn't good, and I'm just going to kind of leave it at that. And I said, oh, hell no. No. And I think I even gave you some broadheads and stuff like that. And I'm like, no, we're gonna shoot the same length arrows, the same weight arrows, the same broadheads. All right, bro. And so we got all that taken care of, you know. And I will say this, that I remember. Very few people start shooting deer and are a killer.
Mm-hmm.
All right. There are target shooters and there are killers. And, you know, it's the old Jerry Dale paper plate method. You know, all you got to do is hit a paper plate. You know, aim for the biggest part of the vitals. You don't have to shoot for the heart. All these things. And, dude, we've all wounded them. We all have. I don't care crap who you are, but this guy was a freaking killer, dude. I mean, once he got the hunger bead, I always call that, the starvation for it. This dude just started smoking them, dude. I mean, left and right. So take us down that journey, you know. So you got into it, and what was your first deer like?
And before you go into that real quick, Mike, you know, one thing I wanted, this was later on in the outline, but I think it's a good point to kind of tie into is, like, you know, as a young hunter, like, you know, I always think about how many deer I could have shot if I didn't screw one little thing up. And I think that happens to a lot of young hunters. Like,
it happens to all hunters.
So when you're telling, you know, going into this, you know, just kind of talk about, you know, when it kind of clicked for you, like, hey,
oh yeah,
I got the hang of it.
Yeah,
now.
no, and feel free to paint a very clear picture as a kid going out there, doing this, hunting a deer. You're going to take the shot, all that. It feels, because there's somebody else that's just getting into the sport, or a young person that they're going to go through this. Mm-hmm. And number one, I want you to know that you won't die when your heart starts to flutter really bad. All right, you won't die.
Well, you never know, you might.
Yeah,
and a hell of a way to go. Right?
Yeah, right. And keep in mind that when Michael's telling you the story, we sat on 3/4-inch plywood portable tree stands with chain links that were hung up in a tree, no safety belts. All right.
I think when I started hunting, I had that bow you were talking about my setup. I think it's Bear Archery. I don't even know if they're still around anymore, but it was just that, you know, my dad bought me this bow and didn't know if I was really going to hunt. So he bought me this cheap bow from Walmart. And it had plastic cams on it. Didn't even have like aluminum or, you know, any sort of, you know, cams that were halfway decent. And I was just an absolute poor shot with that. The first deer I shot, I was kind of lucky. You know, I got lucky. I hit the deer where I was supposed to. Deer ran off and died, and it was awesome. The next year, I couldn't get that bow tuned to save my life, and it was because likely one of those little cams were bent, or whatever. And I finally got a decent bow. I can't remember what my first bow was, a Browning, which was a decent bow, nothing fancy, not like the bows of today. You know what I mean? No dual cam, no 90% let off, nothing like that. I think it had 65% let off or whatever it was. This was 25 years ago, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And once you start having a little confidence in your equipment, then you really start noticing your accuracy goes up, whether it's, and we had wooden tree stands like that they would get ice on them. And you can remember climbing to those things. Like we're not going to see no damn deer out here. Every time I shift my weight 5 pounds, it's like an ice skating rink is cracking. It's like, there's no way that this is going to happen. I can remember one time, this is my second or third year hunting, I had probably the biggest buck that it was the biggest buck I'd seen at that time, but it was easily one, and this was on public land in Illinois, same place. 175-inch deer came about 50 yards out, and this was in like late December or January, and there was an inch of ice on our tree stand. And he comes walking straight, he turns down this trail and walks and gets off the trail and comes straight in at me at like 18 yards. And I had already turned, I'm facing him, the way I'm supposed to be facing him, right, waiting for him to turn one way or the other so I can draw my bow, my rinkety-dink plastic cam bow here. I'm gonna nail this, right? And then I did one little shift in my tree stand, and it cracks, and the deer takes off. And that's, when you're learning how to bow hunt, that's super frustrating. Nowadays, it wouldn't really bother me because I know there's more to hunting than just killing deer, But
yeah, it's heartbreaking at a young age.
Yeah, to accept that and be like, well, that was my chance. It's like, well, you're gonna have, if you hunt long enough, you'll have lots of chances. But but I think it's just developing or getting equipment, using the equipment, being confident with it, being comfortable with it, being confident in yourself, and then you start threading the needle, so to speak. And it just takes time and it takes effort. And I think for me, right around when I started killing 2, 3, 4, 5 deer a season, that's when you really know you got it, and you can figure out, and then you're starting to pass deer, right? So you'll go out and see 6, 8, 10 deer, and it was just fun to watch them, and you just watched them, and they walked right by you, or they walked under your tree, or you went out there to kill them. You know what I mean? So it's like, then you start to learn how deer act and when they get spooked and what they can see and what they can't see and what they're not worried about and what they're worried about and where the wind's blowing. And you take all these factors in and you just become more confident as a hunter. And now it's like second nature. When a deer comes in, I know exactly what to do. There's nothing that really phases me about the deer. It's just deer hunting, right? So it's like, and then after a while, you just start to get really, really, really good at it. And it just takes time and effort and sort of learning, When you're young, you don't have the capacity to do that. But as you get older and get more experience, then you get better at it.
Yeah. So that point you just brought up is something that I've related to turkey hunting and duck hunting because, like turkey hunting this year, we had an opportunity, me and my dad hunting quick of this, is we could have killed this turkey and I don't have the frame of reference to know how turkeys behave and like what I can get away with. And I was telling my dad when we were walking back, I was like frustrated at myself and stuff. And I was just like, with deer hunting, it's like you have this frame of reference of what you can get away with. And like, you can read the body language of a deer and understand like
a tail flick. They're fine. Their tail's frayed. They're nervous,
Exactly. So that's a great point, Mike. It's just, you just building up that knowledge base, I guess.
Well, it's just like us. We didn't even know, like on the turkey thing, Tristan, about the red head. It's nervous. We had no idea.
Yep.
But to a turkey hunter, they're like, oh, shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so you better make a move.
That's a great point you make, Mike. No doubt about it.
Well, I can remember hunting when I was younger, teenage years, and even in my mostly teenage, early 20s, I wouldn't know when to draw my bow. It's like, okay, the deer right here at 20 yards, and then I just watch them come in and leave, and I'm like, what the hell did I do? I didn't draw my bow. I didn't do anything. It's like I didn't know when do I do it? How do I do it? It's just. But then after a while, you just kind of, and you know when to take that chance if they're acting spooked and it's a buck you want to shoot, and it's like, well, it's now or never, right? I got to do it.
Yep.
So
It's instinctual a little bit.
It's super instinctual. And, I think we still deal with, that's one of the most challenging things that you cannot predict is, there's hunters out there that will say that they every single shot, but true professional bow hunters won't do it every time. They know their deer.
Gosh, yeah.
They've studied, they're watching that body language. They know that, hey, that tail's a little afraid. If I mount right now, he's bolting, and I got to take this shot on the walk, so that's a great, there's so many scenarios like that, right? So many.
That's like real quick, like the whole thing about, I didn't start paying attention to it until the last, 4 or 5 years. But, like if a deer spooked, like the possibility of them jumping your, ducking your arrow and aiming lower to kind of compensate for that. And like, I just think back at like early on how many deer I missed that ducked my arrow. Like it had to have been 5 at least,
Yeah, I know. It's crazy.
Yeah. So, I've tried to keep track of that throughout the years too. And I always, when I aim at the bullseye when I'm target shooting, I always keep my arrow about 1 to 3 inches below that. And I don't move my sight because I always want to put my sight where I want, like where the kill zone is. Does that make sense? So I don't adjust my sight. I just know my arrow shoots 2 inches low about at 20 yards,
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then the same at 30, 40, whatever.
Right. Let me just kind of fast forward some stuff here. So, Michael and I hunted hard, public land. Dude, that's all we did, dude. Just hunt hard, public land, do. And it was such a great camaraderie thing, with him and his dad and all our buddies and me and Michael and everybody. It was just a great experience, like Tristan told you about. Tristan got to be a part of that. And it was just you're addicted to that too, and, but I just remember this young guy, and this is where I really want to dig down with you, Mike, is I just remember this young man telling me, he said, this ain't good enough. This ain't good enough. He said, I'm going to own my own piece of private land one day. And so we kept taking him to the bar and try to get him to hook up with the farmer girl, and he wouldn't do it. No, but he told me that. And me sitting here now, knowing what you've done, everybody needs to hear about it, because I am so, I think so many people would be so inspired to hear where we're going to go with the rest of this tonight. And just take us back to you. Michael won't tell you this, but he graduated from Logan College, and I believe at the time he was like number 1 in your academics out of anybody in history of the school, if I remember right. And
well, I was the youngest person, one of the youngest people to graduate, and I don't know if I was I definitely wasn't number 1 in my class, but I did all right, but average or better, which is all it takes, But,
yeah, but you did that.
I think my whole, I can remember sitting in the trailer watching hunting videos from, when they first started coming out. You had to buy them on DVD, not even on DVD. I think it was VHS tapes, and
Monster Bucks
in Walmart, and you watched them on your in the trailer while we were hunting. And I was like, man, Dad, I'm gonna have 300 acres somewhere in Illinois or Iowa.
Do you want coffee that doesn't suck? Get the Duck. Dirty Duck coffee is made specifically for the waterfowl enthusiast. Enjoy flavors like Morning Wood, Dark Dynasty, Cinnamon Teal Snickerdoodle, and First Flight to unlock the flavor that you'll enjoy in the blind for years to come. Our friends at Dirty Duck Coffee Company are now offering all Zero Duck 30 followers a 15% discount when you use code ZeroDuck15 on your next order.
Somewhere, I don't know, I'm going to have to get 500 acres. I don't know. I'm going to have to, but there's a way to do that even for the average person. You just have to, learn how to work those numbers and make it work for you, So, but that was my ultimate dream. And it was partly because it's an investment and partly because it's fun. It's, you see lots of deer, and it's a completely different hunting environment from public land to private land if you can own and manage your own land. In some ways it's easier, and in some ways it's a lot harder, but it's definitely nice when it's your own piece of ground that you can manage, put food plots on, do some timber stand improvement, and make it a better, living quarters for the deer. It's a lot of fun. So it's kind of like duck hunting and you guys, and you like to get out and scout and like to put in the effort. And, it's the same when you own private land. It's a lot of work, but the goal is that work pays off someday, right? And you get a giant 200 inch deer or something,
Yeah. Well, and before we dive into like what, the property that you've ultimately purchased and things, maybe it's probably best that I just kind of like zip through this, because Michael's just too humble to talk about his accomplishments. But, this guy has worked anywhere from 70 to 150 hours a week for years. I mean, as a military guy, it used to wear me out how many hours this guy was working. But during the off season, it's time to make money, time to chase my dream, time to support my family and my kids and all this stuff. And I've never seen somebody that goes from 0 to 150 during the off season like Mike Ambrose. All right. So to preface of where we're going with all of this, none of this came with like given. All right. Michael went away to an island for at least 1 or 2 seasons just to go to medical school. He sacrificed what he loved to do what he's doing, and had to overcome some other challenges, and then got into the hospital world, started your own practice. You've done all these things, dude, that I think we lose sight of how somebody gets there. You know what I mean? You just look at somebody and you drive down, you see this giant lodge, right? You're driving down the rock road and you look over and you see this lodge and you're like, oh, that's son of a bitch, blah, blah, blah. If you're a blue collar guy, right? You're looking at that and going, but you don't know what they went through to get where they are. Mm-hmm. Yeah, some people get a golden spoon handed to them, but not everybody. And that's what I love about Michael's story, is that he has truly worked his ass off to get to where you are. So now let's pick up with, you are fast forwarded. Now it's time. I'm getting serious about this. What did you start doing? Did you start saving some money, or did you do anything investing wise that helped you get in a better position to buy property? Or
yeah. So I did all the normal things that somebody would do: retirement accounts and spending money on family and housing and all that stuff that you need. But I was also putting away a significant portion of my income, as much as I could, and just waiting on having the opportunity to put down some money on some land. and there's multiple ways to do it. I mean, you can save up cash, pay all cash. You can just put a down payment. And I end up putting probably, I think, 40 or 50% down on land, so it could keep my payment down a little bit. But it's all based on how much income you make, your debt to income ratio. So I had some debt that was from med school and from chiropractic school. I was probably $300,000 in debt from both of those. But as long as you can show a steady stream of income for several years, then you can get approved for a decent loan. I mean, these are relatively secure loans, or land loans that are, the bank don't mind having that debt because it's only going to increase in value. I mean, I can remember looking at land, Tony, when I finished residency in 2011, 2012, you could buy land all day long for $2,500 an acre in Illinois. Now you can't get it for cheaper than $5,000,
wow,
$5,500 an acre. So,
and that's not even tillable.
that's just shit timber.
Yeah.
So, and it may go down, it may go up, but as a general rule, you're going to increase 7 to 15%, sometimes more, every year. So, it's a good investment. So, and people that do this for a living, there's people that buy land for a living. That's what they do. They buy land and they run the numbers, and as long as they can make off that land enough to cover the interest on their purchase, and any other, liabilities on there, whether there's electric bills or if there's a house or whatever, if you can make enough to just pay those off and not even pay the principal down, it's a good investment. You're going to make 5 to 20% every single year from here in perpetuity. And that's just,
Well, and to give a quick plug on this, the True Expert. If you guys want to go back and listen to the Dan Perez, dude, True Experts in what they do, they are a true class act. And these guys and gals are super intelligent with the way they're doing things. It blew Tristan and I's mind. So
Dan talks a lot about exactly what you just said, Mike, is just, just the exact strategy you just laid out.
Strategy.
Yeah.
It's like a business plan.
Mm-hmm.
It's all it is. I mean, there's people that do that and only that for a living. They have no other job. Whether that's the same as real estate or land investing or whatever. Mm-hmm. And you have good years and bad years, but if you hold on to it for 5 years, you're going to make money off of it, regardless of, what type of economic downturn there is or whatever.
Right.
So, and you have tax advantages. So, I mean, if there's a house on there that you can rent out for a VRBO, you can depreciate the house over time. I mean, which is like a tax deduction every year for the next 27 years. So it lowers your taxable income. I mean, there's so many things you can do with respect to land and real estate that, it's, if you're a hunter and you're young and you have the opportunity to just learn a little bit about this, it doesn't take much. I mean, nowadays with YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and whatever else they got out there nowadays, you can find ways and you can learn how to do this stuff and accountants know this too. You pay an accountant to do your taxes at the end of the year, they'll figure it out for you. Tell them what you did, tell them what you want to do, and they that's what they're paid to do. Well,
and I want to kind of interrupt here. I think a great point to make here is, and Dan Perez talked about this. If you want to do this, the average person, you can own your own land. You really can. Absolutely. You really can. It's kind of like, you see, I don't want to say this the wrong way, but I guess we all measure success in a different way, right? And we work harder depending on what we want and where we came from and our backgrounds and what we've been educated on and all these different things, right? But at the end of the day, if you're sitting there thinking that, dude, I'll never own my own land. I grew up in a tough life, whatever it is, I don't care. Yes, you can. And if you listen to some of these professionals and what Michael's talking about here, what Dan talked about in that podcast, yes, you can. It's just that you got to eliminate the excuses, right? And that one of the biggest excuses might be working 120 hours at a hospital a week. I mean,
yeah, or doing something you don't want to do for a year or two or three. But once you have equity in a property, you can even use that equity to buy more property. So, I mean, all you got to do is make the payment and keep it in good standing with the bank. And if you have, let's say you have a piece of property that's worth, and keep in mind, it's going up 10, 20% a year, right? So let's say you buy a piece of property for $100,000. It's 20, 30 acres, 40 acres, whatever it is. It's now worth 2 years later, it's worth $120,000. You paid a loan down on it. Say you put 20% down, you're down to $70,000. You have $50,000 in equity in that property in 2 years. You can take that $50,000 in equity and buy more land.
Yeah,
that's what you can do. So.
Well, and there's perks like Dan had talked about. If you have property, and help me out on this, Tristan, because my memory sucks. But if you have, like, let's say you're buying a piece of land, and you have a piece of land that is, let's say it's tillable, right? And I'm going to keep it simple. Let's say you have 2 squares of 40 acres, 40 acres of woods, 40 acres of tillable. You could actually buy that 40 acres of tillable through your IRA, right?
I don't remember
tax
exactly
free.
What he said. Yeah,
is what he was saying. So you could pull money out of your IRA, buy that property,
and you can't technically hunt it.
Yeah. It cannot be under recreational use.
Yes,
was the term.
Right, yeah,
you can buy that in 2 separate buys. So when you go to buy that property, you say, "Look, I'll buy the property from you, but I'm buying through 2 different payments."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're splitting it up. You're having 2 separate mortgages on it.
Right, exactly.
And his point, too, was like, he's looking at it from a perspective of like, and I know you kind of have a similar thought too, Mike, when you were going into your property and stuff, is like, hey, there's so many acres here that I can lease out to a farmer get a certain percentage of his whatever, and that's being paid towards what my monthly payment.
Well,
know?
what Dan said was, this is what he did in his situation. If I remember this right, he bought this piece of property. They had the tillable and the woods. So, long story short, the tillable that he bought, because it was tax-free, the money that he saved off of that when he sold it was able to buy more property with that, just that tillable piece. The profits from that tillable piece, he said he had zero debt in that property and just made money basically.
Wow.
Just like zero debt.
There's so many nooks and crannies in the tax code and everything, and it's
the different incentives of every state are different too.
Yeah, and the best way to look at this is like, what's it going to cost me for a piece of land? Is every $1 million is about $5,000 a month in mortgage.
Okay.
Now, so if you're wondering how much land can I afford, how much I have an extra $2,000 a month from income that I don't spend that I want to use, so that'll get you about $400,000 or piece of property, $400,000 piece of property. So, and that's on and obviously if there's tillable, then you have you get less land obviously because it has more value to it. My property, but before you do this and just start spending money, you have to really define what your farm is going to do. What do you want it to be for you, right? And I struggled with this because I was putting money away, and that's what helped me be able to put a large portion down on a large piece of land because I couldn't find anything. I mean, it was like I was too squeamish and too much of a pansy to pull the trigger early as I was making money, and I waited and sat on it and sat on it and sat on it and sat on it, and then I got kind of busy and then kind of forgot about it. And then when I started looking for land seriously again about 3-4 years ago, I looked for 3 years hard. I looked at pieces of land all over the place, and it was just flood bottom ground, no place to build a house, no place to put a lake, no place to, no easy access for hunting. The neighbors are shit. There's 900 tree stands literally on my fence row. This isn't going to work for me. I mean, I went through this for years. I spent hours with real estate agents in Southern Illinois, Northern Illinois, Western Illinois, Missouri, Iowa, everywhere. And you have to find out, you got to really know who your neighbors are. I was actually under contract on a piece of property. There was 2 separate farms down the street. One was going to be awesome for duck hunting. One was going to be awesome for deer hunting, but one was probably 150, 160 acres. The other one was, I think, 120 acres. But I was landlocked where I wanted to put my house. I had a little section that was not part of the 2 parcels. It was actually 3 parcels. The third one was a tiny little parcel where I was going to build a house. And it was landlocked, and the neighbor wasn't going to let me purchase an easement or anything like that. So it was going to be a nightmare. I was like,
wow.
Well, shit, I don't want to work with a neighbor who's going to be like that. It was literally the road was here, and then 10 steps over was my property line.
Wow.
And he had always had this dream of putting a white rail fence down both sides of the roadway. And he bought that little section from the guy previously. There's a whole other legal issue you can have with easements to properties. I would have won that case, but it's like, you don't want to be somewhere where you're not going to be all the time as a hunting property and have your neighbor pissed off at you. You know what I mean?
Right,
so it's like, I don't want to, and he was sneaking on the property and hunting. I found tree stands on the property because it was, owned by a bank. It was a foreclosure.
Wow.
And I was like, you know what? I'm backing out of this contract. I left it in the contract, and I can leave at any point in time for X, Y, and Z reason. And I just backed out because I didn't want that. You know what I mean? But moral of the story is sometimes you got to wait. You got to wait 2-3 years just to find a perfect piece of land and know exactly what you wanted it for. My goal was deer hunting, number 1. And number 2, it would be awesome to have some place where I could stay and take my family to. And that's why the house was part of it,
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually I found that property with a lake and fully stocked, and the kids can go up there and have a good time, and I can hunt or work on the farm or do whatever, So you just have to define what it is you're looking for. If you're just looking for a piece of ground that you can go hunting, or if you want a place where you can have people there and have a good time and have your friends over and everybody can hunt and have a good time, it just depends on what your priorities are.
Yeah. And I remember, at least I think I remember, Mike, like when you were looking through these properties and stuff, from just like a strictly like deer habitat perspective, weren't there some like key things you were looking for, like a property to have, like, I think you mentioned, I mean, with the lake, obviously like a water source, like I know you wanted a certain amount of like bedding area. Like, can you kind of go into some of that stuff?
I wanted it to be fully set up for deer hunting. That's my passion. So, and obviously it was going to take some work and some effort and doing some things to the ground to make it, sort of perfect for me. But I wanted it to have some sort of history with deer and deer hunting. And so I made sure that there was a trail cam history on the property, right? You don't always have the luxury of getting that. And that doesn't mean it's a bad property, but if you have people that are hunting there and killing every damn deer that walks by, then it's going to take a little more time than a farm that's never been touched, right? So I found a farm that was never hunted for 27 years since the people owned it. They didn't let people hunt on it. There were no deer stands on it. There was a couple stands off the property, on neighbor's property, but as a general rule, it was relatively untouched, and that was a priority for me. And you can usually find this stuff out from the realtor or just by looking at pictures online or whatever of the property. But and then the property that I ended up purchasing had a couple deer that were well over 170 the first year that I they're both dead now, and I didn't get any of them, but that's okay. But I wanted a property that had some history with it, they had some trail cam pictures. The realtor that I bought this property from had put cameras up the summer before they listed it, and they had 2 deer that were, well over 170. And every year there's been a deer 170 over. So it just had the genetics, and it had the deer on there that I was looking for,
And, as far as like what you've kind of done to, I guess, round out the property, you can say the way you want it, like as far as food plots and things like that, what have you done, like specifically, I guess, to this property?
Yeah, so the first thing that I did was, when I actually, before I bought it, I actually walked the whole property, and I found 2 giant sheds. And I was like, shit, I got to buy this place. Right? But what I walked the entire place, and I had Huntwise out, and I was marking bedding areas, marking creek crossings, funnels, travel corridors. And then I would mark potential food plots because nothing was done with this place. There was about 20 acres or so of ag, but there were other CRP fields that were not in CRP contract that could be turned into, food plots. So I was in my head thinking about all the potentials with the property. But the first thing that I did when I first started mapping out the property was obviously what's most important for me in deer hunting is food. I mean, if you're gonna hunt deer, you got to have food, right? So, I mean, you can't, that's probably your number one priority when you're designing a property is where can I put food? What can I turn into a food plot? And there was about 20 acres, and I was able to recruit about 6 to 8 more acres in areas that I would put into food plots. So I've got about 27 acres or so of ag field, or, what I call green plots on my farm, out of about 330 acres. So, and there's some controversy and argument over how much do you need. Obviously, I think more is better, but 10% of your property is, I think is plenty. But if you can have 15 to 18% of your property, then that's perfect.
Well,
all kinds of deer.
I think that you have to take in consideration what kind of hardwoods you have. If you're down here in the South and you have all pine, it's a completely different story. Then maybe you're looking at 50% or something, because there's no vegetation, because deer are browsing animals. They browse and they eat blackberry stickers. They eat all these different things. I can go down these
I've
rabbit
seen
holes.
them in my backyard eating kudzu vines and all kinds of other vines, which I had no idea they even eat.
Yeah, I mean they browse.
They'll eat anything. I mean, they'll eat a lot of stuff. They like forbs, and I mean, 60 to 80% of their diet's probably forbs and woody browse and twigs and branches and leaves, and So I mean, you have to provide that for them. But and when you look at a property too, you want to zoom out and see what the hell's around you, right? I mean, what feeds into your property, what ag fields around you. There's nothing wrong with being a section of 100, 200 acres and nothing but ag fields.
Yeah.
But if you can't access that property, you're kind of hosing yourself. It's not a property you want to hunt all the damn time. It's a property you want to sneak in during the right time when the buck's there, and you know what I mean, hunt it twice a season, 3 times a season. You don't want to. But the way my property sets up, the house is on the east side of the property, so any sort of...
Our partners at Huntwise are offering an exclusive discount for Zero Duck 30 followers. As an elite member, some of the features you'll immediately gain access to are Huntcast, Windcast, peak kill times, property lines, owner information and phone lookup, 250 map layers, unlimited offline maps, 3D maps, social media, and on top of it all, save up to 50% off some of the top hunting brands in the industry. Download and explore the #1 hunting tool set today and save 20% by using code DUCK30.
Westerly wind, northerly wind, southerly wind, and I can access it from the east side or the west side of my property. So I mean, I can hunt anywhere with any wind at any point in time. I can give the farm a break if I want to. You know what I mean? Hunt the north end versus the south end, and have completely different herds of deer. Really, I mean, there's a lot of the same bucks will travel during the rut, but and you can a small property, 80, 100 acres, can hunt like it's 300 if it's laid out correctly.
Well, and I think you also kind of walk on a point here that, when you're looking at buying this place, Dan Perez talked about the community that you want to be a part of, and he broke it down just like a neighborhood. If you're the type of person that, hey, I want this property because I want to ride 4-wheelers all over it, and the house is going to blow the prevailing wind all over it, and all this stuff like Mike talked about, where the house is, that makes a difference. Then that's the community you want to be a part of, but if you don't, and you want just big bucks, then you're going around and doing a little bit of interviewing, or at least talking maybe with some game wardens or anybody else to try to gain a little bit of knowledge of what's going on around you, and I think that that's a huge point whenever you're looking at buying a piece of property, is really like what you are truly looking for, and is if everybody around you is participating in the same thing.
It goes back to just doing some research and finding out. I mean, I'd hate to buy a $500,000 or $1 million piece of land, and you hunt it for 5 years, and turns out it's a dud. You know what I mean? For whatever reason. I mean, so and no property's perfect, but then there's some properties that are 100, 200 acres that you can really turn into great hunting farms and keep deer on your property. I mean, we can talk about deer movement on another podcast, but there is an opportunity to even capitalize on some, roaming type of deer. If you have a 100 acres, 50 acres, 60 acres, that's managed better than your neighbors. You're pulling them onto your property, but it just goes back to doing research and talking with your neighbors and knowing, are they shooting every animal that exists? And I did all that research to find out that, that this property is something that I would want.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but I know we're talking a lot about food source and all that kind of stuff, which is super valid. But, if I remember right, when you and I talked a lot, one of the most important things to you was bedding area. You wanted that. Sure. You wanted that thick ass, like I can't walk through it type of stuff. Talk a little bit about that.
So you want the foods, in my opinion, is you want a farm that has the potential to have enough food, right? You have to still put the time in and develop the food plots, put them in the right spot. to create the travel corridors to and from, but you want that to be your foundation. It's like, can I survive my deer herd all hunting season long, right?
Right.
So if you're a strip of timber and it's 20 acres and you'll 80 acres of ag fields and the farmer's going to take it all and you don't have any sort of agreement with the farmer for food, you're going to be hosed about, this beginning part of the rut, right? When they harvest all the field, all the crops and everything. So you want to be able to do what you can with food. And then secondarily, you want to make sure you have doe bedding areas and buck bedding areas, which are one and the same kind of. I mean, if you ever drive down a field on my farm, if I take my 4-wheeler out and I drive down a field and it's off season, whatever, I'm jumping mostly does that are close to the food source, right? The ag fields and the green plots and everything. So the does tend to bed up close to the food source, and then bucks behind them 100 to 200, 300 yards back in the timber. So you want to make sure you have some sort of depth of cover so that it provides doe bedding areas, buck bedding areas, travel corridors to and from. But in my particular farm, what I really fell in love with and really like is I had that thick timber, that thick vegetation in the bottoms with good browse and good cover. But I also had ridge tops. Probably 10% of my farm is cedar, all cedars. And that gives them sort of a late season bedding source. So, it gives them better thermal cover. So if it's really cold, like in the Midwest and northern areas, they really like that cedar ridge tops, because it prevents the snow from hitting the ground and it blocks the wind a little bit better. So you have both. And I can't count the number of times, the number of beds that I've seen on those transition areas from hardwood or a brushy cover into a cedar thicket. And there's just tore up with, deer shit everywhere, bedding areas. And they just love those transitions of habitat, whether it's a CRP field going into a timber, and then timber going into a cedar top, a cedar ridge top, something like that. But so you want that diverse type of habitat on your property, and that's what this farm had. It had brushy, thick bottoms, creek bottoms. It had some ridge tops that needed some timber stand improvement to make it thicker and give it some more depth. And then it had the cedar ridge tops as well that provided that thermal cover for late season.
I guess, kind of off that, Mike, from a strategy standpoint, can you kind of talk about, based on, how your property is laid out, some of the strategies you might employ based on, like, you're talking about, from a cedar to hardwood, or, transition points and stuff like that, just for some people listening.
Well, and honestly, if you want to, Mike, Mike has shared his farm with us on Huntwise. We're not going to tell you even what state it's in, all right? But what we'll do is Tristan might be able to do this. I hate, when you mess with an editor and tell them that they can do stuff and they can't do it, you're getting cussed out after the podcast. Yeah. All right. So I'm not going to do that, but I think Tristan might be able to throw up Huntwise, kind of walk us through a tree stand setup like Tristan's talking about, and we'll throw it up on Huntwise, and Tristan can kind of show it, maybe give our viewers and listeners a little bit of a visual on one of these reels or something.
Yeah, let's say big maybe on that.
So yeah, I mean, we are you gonna do that now, or are you gonna do it later? Are you talking about?
No. If we can do it, it'd just be from an editing standpoint. But, yeah.
But just kind of talk about.
I can even create some, short videos or something like that, and kind of. But I'll tell you, if you can imagine, my house sits on the east side of the property. There's a little bit of woods there I can hunt, and to be honest with you, it's really good hunting too. For whatever reason, I've had 2 giant bucks last year and the year before that live close to my house. And it's like, why the hell are they doing that? It doesn't make any sense, but it's because they know, right? I mean, it's a huge bottom. It goes into the back area of my pond, and it's probably 300 yards from the side of my house. And it goes down into a huge bottom, and it's thick, it's nasty, predators can't get in there. You can hear anybody coming from a mile away, and they just hang out there. And I see them. They don't show up there until right before the rut. End of October is when they show up for whatever reason, which goes back into buck movements. Why do bucks do what they do? But there's a certain percentage of bucks that are mobile, and for whatever reason, they right around when they start shedding their velvet, come September and October. Late August, they start moving their home range a little bit, and that's when these deer 2 years in a row have showed up, two different deer. But they like that thick, brushy cover that they can hang out in all day, sneak in and out of, being quiet, and then make sure they have access to food. And they might travel a mile or two at night for food, but the way my house sits on my property, it's on the east side of my property. And as you move west, there's a big ag field that's probably 200 yards wide, 150 yards wide, something like that. And then there's what I call CRP fields that I turn into a green plot. So every year it's a mix of rye, oats, wheat, brassicas, and a little bit of clover. And I plant it in the fall. So it's primed and ready to go. So I plant it in August. I'm getting ready to plant next weekend when I'm up there. And then it's all creek bottom again. Big brushy bottoms, creek bottoms where the deer like to bed, and then it's some cedar ridge tops, and in that order. So they'll bed on the other side of my property, and then when they come out to feed, they hit those green plots, and I have some pinch points built into those green plots, and I've got stands on the downwind side and on both sides. So those plots run east and west. So I have a tree stand on the north end, tree stand on the south end, depending on what wind you got. So they come from the west, head east into the green plot, pinch point, deer stand, and then another pinch point as they enter into the big ag field, which is usually corn or beans. This year I don't have anything, but it's supposed to be corn or beans. So in most deer, if you know how they feed, they will bed up all day long, and they'll feed on woody browse, they'll feed on leaves, forbs, whatever flowers and poison ivy they can find in the woods, which is usually in October, November, it's browned up. They need to feed on a green source before they go to ag again, because most of the ag is browning up. So in order for them to digest their food, they'll hit that green food source. Tender wheat, tender rye, tender brassicas leaves, they're all green. Tender clover, that's all green. And then they'll hit that other, the leaves on the beans that are browning, and the leaves on the corn that they need to eat those, or the grain that's in the corn. But in order to digest properly, I mean, it's nothing to see 30, 40 deer walk right by you at 15 yards, 20 yards, going from one food source to the next in a night, So, I mean, it's just, but it's kind of by design. They have to hit that green food source about dusk, or right at dusk, right at 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So if they have the choice, they will do that because it's easy, it's tender, it's food. They like to eat on that green source before they have more of a woody browse type of food.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's something I never knew going into this. That's just kind of their natural cycle of things.
Yeah, it just has to do with how they digest food and how they, they're kind of picky eaters. So have you ever watched a deer? Mm-hmm. And what got me on this years ago is I'd watch a deer walk right by like apples that have fallen off the tree, or it's like, why the hell didn't that deer stop and eat all those apples or whatever food source was out there? And it's because they tend to be picky eaters. They eat what they need at the right times. And if they have a brown woody food source back in the woods, that's what they're nibbling on all day long. When they get out of the woods, they want something green, something tender, something that changes their digestive patterns a little bit. And then they'll move on out to, grain fields, or whether it's, bean fields or soybeans or corn or whatever it is, for their nighttime feedings. And they feed 5 or 6 times a day. They're feeding all day, and they need 5 to 6 pounds of food every single day, which when you're talking plants, that's a lot of food. You know what I mean?
Man, that's really so interesting, and something, just looking back on, when we had that lease in Georgia that you came and hunted on, Mike, like the deer, you know, early season would be on that property, and like we did good early on, and you know, but a lot of that property was, like my dad was saying earlier, you know, like pine rows where there's not a lot of green vegetation growing. And then basically, you know, in Georgia, you can put out, you know, whatever you want for deer. You know, I don't know if it's whatever you want, but you can put corn or whatever. And the deer traffic really fell off later in the season. And just hearing you say that, it just makes me wonder if that had to have had something to do with it. Is like we didn't have a good green source on that property, you know?
Well, and every habitat's a little bit different, but you know, there's evenings where I'll sit out there and on a green plot, and it, you know, I'll sit the bean field. If I sit on a bean field, I'll see 5-10 deer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and if that's all you had, you'd probably see more. But I'll transition over to my green field and I'll see 28 deer. I mean, like it's and they're showing up all hours and it's because that's the only thing that's green that time of year, right? In October, November, when everything else is browning up and sort of dying off for the year, that's their live food source, you know? So it's more nutritious. It's more palatable. So whenever plants are growing, it's easier to chew. It's a little more tender. It has more flavor. It has
higher nutrition rate. Yeah.
Yep. So the deer just eat it up, you know? So, and rye is really the best because rye will last into November, December. But oats will peak early, so they green up early. So I put a little bit of oats in my mix. Wheat's probably least important, but I put a little bit of wheat in there just for diversity, you know, because like I said, deer are picky eaters. The reason you put a lot of things in your food plot mixes is because if they don't like the stage of the rye, they might like the wheat or the oats, or they might like the brassica. And I put usually collards, kale, rape, and then some purple top turnips in there. And they might eat those leaves as they're starting to grow. And then I put some clover in there just for higher protein content. But that's basically the green plot mix that I use on all my green plots. And I'll have probably 7 acres of green plots every year that I put those out. And those are easy to grow because even if you have a drought, the rye will grow like crazy. And you can just keep loading it up and you can overseed it twice, August and September, and you'll just have this lush green field, and it'll grow in the sand. It'll grow in the back of your truck. You know what I mean? If you believe. Yeah. It grows in the rock in my barn. If mice get in there and they just start eating the crap out of it, and there's piles of seed, you'll literally have this lush green field in my barn. So, it'll grow anywhere.
No, I do think you bring up a great point about the greenery stuff because, you know, as a Illinois born hunter, one of the things you definitely have a stereotype visual of is driving past those fields of clover that, you know, the clover lasts a little bit more green than the alfalfa does. And because alfalfa is going to brown on the first frost, you know, but you drive past those fields and that's where you're seeing your 28 versus 8, like you were talking about, or, you know, that big group of deer. And I just never in all these years of hunting, you learn something all the time, right? And that's something I'm learning on this podcast.
That's what I was just saying too. Yeah,
is that.
Well,
it's
and even going back to those summers we drive around up where we hunt on public land, you look out at a bean field that has beans that are a foot tall or smaller, they're just tearing it up, right?
Yeah.
It's because it's fresh.
As soon as they start to flower, dude.
Right, and then once those beans get 2 foot tall and you're, you know, granted you can't see the deer as well, then they're still out there, but you just see fewer deer hitting it. But beans are probably the most preferred by any deer by all means. But as those beans start to brown, and they'll kind of, I don't want to say get away from them, but they'll eat those pods, but they don't touch those pods again until it's like December, January, until they need to. You know, they're eating other things, acorns in November and October, and they'll come back out to the bean pods again. But because those acorns are fresh, those acorns are, you know, just fell from the tree. They're, you know, I mean, they're looking for things that are fresh, palatable, have the protein content that they need and the nutritional content that they need. And green source in November and October is by far the easiest to kill deer off of, you know.
Imagine this for a minute, and I'm going to trip you guys out. We eat as humans based on, I mean, so many multitudes of things, but so much it's dependent on your flavor that you're looking for, the taste. I feel like eating fettuccine Alfredo tonight because it tastes good, or I feel like eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, whatever it might be, right? But I think that it's in your mind as a human, we have to shift ourselves a little bit to understand that these animals are eating based on genetic
to survive.
Yeah. Exactly. And so that inner, whatever you want to call it, is driving that force. It's not like, oh, corn's great, deer are going to eat all the corn. No, that's not the case at all. It's driven from their survival. You know, and
well, I will do with my corn and beans next year when I get them up. So I mean, this year we had a horrible grow season. I had 6 or 8 inch beans that I'm going to leave up, and I'm going to plant right over it, put some rye over it, and some other stuff. But next year when they brown up, I have a good stand of beans. I'll interseed them with wheat, or I'll interseed them with brassicas to give it diversity. Same with my corn. I'll probably go down my corn rows and sprinkle out some rye or something like that. Or you can use what's called it's a balanza clover or balanza clover. It tends to grow pretty rapid and grow into like across the floor, so it kind of covers the ground a little bit. But it'll usually, once that corn gets so tall, starts to dry out a little bit. You can sprinkle in some clover, and it may grow, it may not. It may grow up in the springtime. The good thing about clover, most of it anyway, not all types of clover, but even annual clovers, if they're supposed to be, you know, not grow the next season, they will. They'll usually head out the next season. And it's the first thing to head out at spring greenups. That's why I put clover in my mixes, because it's high protein content, and it'll usually head out, you know, the next spring, and then the deer will be hitting that like crazy come shed hunting season. So, and you can literally drive your four-wheeler down your food plots, your green plots where there's some clover popping up, and you'll find 2 or 3 sheds, you know, so or just off the field. But the idea is that's providing a spring green source. It's the first thing to come to, you know, to start to grow in the spring. And you can even frost seed clover too in like January, early February, or even into March, which is what I'll do with my 6 acres that I plant in green. I'll just overseed them with clover, let those kind of grow up a little bit, and then I'll usually plant something in the summer there just to cover the dirt. And that's usually what I call it's a summer mix. It has some brassicas in it. It has some clover in it. It has some hemp, sun hemp. It has some, just to give it some structure to the soil. And then I'll usually till it under and then plant my fall plot on top of it come August. But it has some different things in it that the deer will pick at. But it mostly just covers the soil. And but that's why you put clover in, because clover is a lot of clover is considered a perennial. I mean, it'll grow for several years. You know, even if you till it under, it'll still grow up again. But and it's a good protein source for deer.
You know, I kind of got a 2-part question for you, Mike. You know, it always, when I see like people on social media or YouTube or whatever, and they all summer long they got freaking crab claw or whatever the hell they're calling this buck, you know, and they're seeing them all season long. But I've seen, or you know, and then they end up killing them in the fall. But I've seen the flip side of that, where the people are seeing deer all summer long and or buck all summer long, and they're gone. And I know that you have like some kind of badass like camera system to track these bucks, but like how much, you know, a lot in the deer hunting community as a whole, I see a lot of off-season pictures like, oh man, like look at these bucks. And I've kind of, what's spurring this question is like, I've seen it from our own scouting, is like you see these bucks all summer long, and then you go out there in the fall and you don't ever see them one time. So how, I guess my 2-part question would be like, how much are you taking into consideration like the bucks you see in the summer that you might be able to hunt them in the fall? Yeah. And I guess also, you know, how is your camera system set up?
Well, so the reason you put all this work into property, or the reason I do, is to try and make my property better than the neighbors, which it is, right? And that's to keep as many deer close or aware that my property exists so that they can find does during the rut. They can hit up the food sources late season. That's why you put all that effort into it. But I think, where your question is coming from is like, what do deer do? Like if you see them in the summer, you better get on them early, right? So I mean, because someone else can obviously shoot them, but a lot of deer, there's a you've heard of MSU Deer Lab or Deer University. So I subscribe to all their stuff on YouTube. I was actually just watching one of their videos earlier today, but they break down collared bucks, mature bucks 2.5 years and older. And then they track their movement for 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, whatever it is. But so you have to kind of understand the personalities of deer. Deer are kind of like people, you know what I mean? So, I mean, and if you look at some of their research, and I don't know how accurate this is in my neck of the woods here in the Midwest versus down in Mississippi, but I would imagine it's pretty close to being the same. But a third of deer, are considered homebodies, are sedentary. They kind of stay within a home range of 1,000, 1,200 acres, a couple square miles. They don't do anything, right? And that's their entire, for the entire year. Well, they're going to rut there.
They live in a small town all their life and work in a factory.
Yeah, exactly.
Son of a bitch.
They're just lazy. They're kind
bunch
of
of Democrats.
Me, They're just like, oh, that's a lot of work to go.
It's a bunch of Democrats, dude. It's Democratic deer. It's a bunch of shit. Yeah.
And then about a third of those deer are considered sedentary, but they have excursions, and those excursions throughout. And this is mostly during the hunting season.
Oh, they get 4 weeks of PTO. They're going to Disney, buddy.
Those are the people those are the guys that take the PTO time off during the rut.
Yeah.
So, they take off and leave, and they chase some tail. They do some of this, some of that. Go nibble over here, see what the neighbors got going on. They're nosy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. For sure.
And then another third of those deer are considered mobile. I mean, they may leave for.
Those are the hipsters.
They have like 2 or 3 home ranges.
Are you saying that we need to build a wall?
Yeah. Those. So I think, to answer your question, if you have a deer, you don't know what kind of deer they are, right? I mean, so you see him in August, September, he's hitting your food plots, and you're like, that's the kind of deer that I want to get on the first 2 weeks of season and put him down. That's, and just because you don't know, he might leave. And the time they typically leave is either whenever their testosterone's getting jacked up and they're getting ready for the rut and they get pushed off, or maybe they're, they don't like confrontation with other bucks. So when other bucks get kind of nosy, then they run off, or maybe they're the nosy buck and they stay there. You never know, but I don't want to miss that opportunity.
Right.
So you just have to kind of figure out what that deer is. And there is some truth to having like an aggressive buck on your property. I had this 10-pointer last year. He was probably 150, 160 inches.
I remember this.
Probably 3 years old, man. I mean, not a big deer, didn't look that old. He's just a stud, perfectly 10-pointer that was probably 155 inch, 160 inch 10-pointer that would just be an absolute stud. And I've not seen him yet this year. I can't get any bucks on my camera because I have no bean and corns, but he was just kind of a nosy, kind of a mean, kind of just an asshole type of deer. He would run off little bucks, run off does. He would run off fawns. He'd get out in that green field and he just pushed everything off the damn field, so that's those type of deer. There's some evidence, I think, amongst people that hunt to take those out of the herd. I mean, they're just kind of, they push off your big bucks and they piss everybody off, and they're all over the damn farm, and
they're a Karen, bro. They're a Karen. They're a Karen of the property.
just complete assholes when it comes down to being an animal, you know.
When it comes down to being an animal. Oh my God!
But I did have a giant deer last year that, you know, the neighbor ended up shooting, and that's good for him, you know. But there was a probably 180-inch. Had 3 drop tines on him, 2 on the left side and 1 on the right. Yep, and just a stud of a deer. And I think I got his sheds from the year before. He was about 155, 160-inch. I called him Harley Davidson because he had a big old wide, probably 22-inch inside spread the year I got his sheds. God. And then he just threw he had short tines, not very tall, probably 8, 10, 12-inch tines was all. But probably 22 or more inside spread, probably 24 last year whenever he got shot. But he had 2 drop tines on the left and 1 drop tine on the right. Just a cool deer. And I had him every 3 or 4 days at one of my stands on the south end of my farm, in between 2 bedding areas, heading out to a food plot. And in between those 2 bedding areas, which we can talk about a little bit, I put up a pond. So I had 2 or 3 small ponds in the woods on my property, but I put in another 7, and I put those in locations like in between bedding areas, and they're not huge. They're about the size of a car or truck or whatever. But I put those watering holes in strategically around stands, funnels towards food plots, to and from food plots. I put one out in the middle of the food plot to pinch them into a certain area. And then I put, the remaining of them were in the woods by a stand, but in between some bedding areas. Because typically what I've noticed, when I've hunted around ponds on public land and whatnot, and doing whatever research I did at the time, was that towards the first part of the rut, end of October, and whenever the bucks are more mobile and more active, a late morning set around a watering hole can be pretty good, and you'll be surprised. 80% of the deer that are within 50 yards of that watering hole hit it like it's a mock scrape. So they want to know what deer are around here, right? Who's been hitting this watering hole? Who walked across this little dam behind this watering hole? Who put a little mock scrape right there by your tree stand and a watering hole right by your tree stand? They want to know who's been here the last day or two. So, man, every single one of those deer would make a 90-degree turn. I had my 4-wheeler trail that I walk in on, and I sit on the southeast side of this 4-wheeler trail coming in, because for a northwest wind. And I put the food plot, or the watering hole, right there at a 90, probably 20 yards off this little this 4-wheeler trail. And every single deer, they'll walk down this 4-wheeler trail, and they'll get to where that takeoff is to the pond, and they'll go hit the pond, take a drink, smell every branch around it, and then walk down. So what I did was, this year, since they're hitting that pond, I walked down that ridge and I hinge cut everything. So I hinge cut everything on that ridge. It's a nice long ridge that runs off my property into a cattle pasture. And I hinge cut everything. So that entire ridge, which is probably 150, 200 yards, is nothing but all the hickories, all the trash timber. I left the oaks up, and I just laid down all the trees. And what that does, those trees will keep growing for a few years and provide woody browse, provide cover, side cover. It's a south-facing slope, so the deer can sit there and when it's cold out and face the sun, and they'll have the sun beating down on them. And then my goal is, I'll see how they use it this year, that they're going to be bedding on that ridge. I can sneak in from the east and hop in my tree stand, and then I'll have a good evening set right in there where they hit the pond, hit the trail that goes out to the food source, but they're going to be bedded up on that ridge 100 yards from my tree stand when I walk in there. And that's the goal. So you got to kind of decide where you want your stands, how you're going to access your stands, where you want your watering holes, where you want your mock scrapes to be, for what type of wind, and what's your second wind option. And then where are you going to create your bedding areas? And you create your bedding areas by, doing TSI and cutting out trees, and depending on what type of tree it is, that's a whole other conversation. But you can do certain things to create bedding areas where you want the deer to bed on your property, So,
Mm-hmm.
and they've already started using it now. In the off season, I'll drive my four-wheeler down the four-wheeler trail, and I can see 6 deer take off on that ridge. So I know they're using it. And what you're doing is you're creating bedding sources that you can sneak in behind with the proper wind, and you have a watering hole right there. So if a buck is going to be on the prowl come, end of October, first part of November, you're creating an opportunity where he wants to be right on that ridge. You know what I mean? So that's the idea with it. And you can't do that stuff on public land. That's what I wanted to do when I bought property, was create my own, hunting opportunities. And you just don't have that opportunity on public land.
Right. Yeah, no, you can't just go through with a chainsaw and start chopping down.
Nope.
Unfortunately.
and that's what I was kind of explaining to you before. Like, if you do that, you'll find, I mean, you've seen this before, Tony, where they'll come in and log some branches, and, these deer will just nibble on those branches that are on the ground for years. You know what I mean?
Well, and especially find a deadfall of a white oak during the first part of hunting season, and it's crack cocaine. It is. Yeah. Deer, it's crack cocaine. Why wouldn't you go smash that shit? Mm-hmm. They just do, and like you said, you're just basically creating more of that habitat to increase your odds.
Yeah, you're just dangling a carrot in front of them and say, come over here. And my farm has a lot of that on it, so I don't need a whole bunch more of it, but every little opportunity you can to put the deer right in front of you versus running around the woods, or it just helps.
Yeah. And as far as kind of your strategy with like camera setups and all that kind of thing, can you go into that a little bit?
So I use cellular cameras for everything. Just because it's nice, you don't have to, with solar panels. So nowadays they'll last a year. They'll last the entire year.
Wow.
Without any problems. I had
and Mike, what do those run about a piece?
It depends. Like, to be honest with you, I'm not even happy with the ones I got. I have Exodus Render. They're okay. They don't have a whole lot of issues, but they do have a lot of false triggers, but I think they all do. Moultrie actually came out with one this year that has false trigger technology where you can actually pixelate your camera, and let's say like it's getting all the sun setting in the western sky, you can actually turn off certain pixels in certain quadrants of the screen. So it doesn't trigger, and it'll actually have like AI technology, they say, that will recognize a deer or a turkey.
Well, that's kind of just as simple as like our ring cameras that me and Katie use at our house. Like, I can go in there and as simple as that and set up like to trigger, I don't know how their technology works, but like if you leave it at normal thing, the front door camera is going to pick up every damn car it drives by, or I can set it to where it only picks up people. So
like a Bigfoot.
I have nothing. I've got a ton of patients that I work with that we always talk deer hunting.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever they come into my office, and a lot of them use the Tacticams, the new ones that just came out.
They came out with a camera
or something. Well, Tacticam. Is it Tacticam?
Well, I knew they had the bow cameras, but like, they came out with? I didn't know they came out with like,
trail camera.
Yeah, trail camera.
Yeah, let me see if I can. Yeah. So I'm looking up here.
Makes sense. It's smart that they did.
Yeah, they have a new one out too that's supposed to be a little bit better, more options and things like that. They're good cameras, but I think the Moultrie that they're coming out with, the Moultrie Edge Pro, they call it. I think it's $179.
That's very reasonable.
I bought the Exodus Render when they were 2-3 years ago, and they were pretty expensive. I don't know that I would buy those again. Personally, they're a fine camera, but I think I would try the Moultrie because I get a ton of just shit pictures, man. Someone farts in the wind, and it's like, oh,
here's your fart picture.
It's like all day long. It's like I set them up now to where I just get one data dump at 2:00 in the morning, but it's like, you're scrolling through 900 pictures to see 40 deer pics or whatever, but. Which is not a huge deal. I shouldn't complain, but it
came a long way, dude. I remember
sure,
taking a piece of thread and putting it across a deer trail.
Yeah.
to be
that's
able
what
to.
you had to do to get
And
a
then
camera.
and then
It
you
was
also
a Polaroid. Then you had to go to town and get it developed.
yeah, but we would. I mean, like when I was a kid, we would take like we'd take a piece of thread, put it across two sticks across a run, and if you came
when
back
the
the
deer was
next
through there.
day, you knew that okay, a deer has walked through here. That's
Yeah.
all you knew. You didn't know what deer it was. You didn't know shit. You just knew that. I mean, I've always used spider webs also. Here's a quick little side tip for all y'all. If you're walking down deer trails that are full of spider webs, they're not being used all the time. Period. They're just not. It's one little observation. But no, I think that this technology in what we have available to our fingertips, I mean, it's going to continue to increase and get better.
Oh, it's crazy. Yeah, I mean, and now I don't have to check my trail cameras at all. And occasionally be a squirrel that'll rip the solar panel cord out of the bottom of it and piss me off, and then I got to go change batteries. But as a general rule, they're pretty sweet. I mean, it'll like I had 80% battery in my cameras when I fired them up this year, and they ran for 7 months last year.
Wow.
You know, I mean,
Holy
so
cow.
yeah, so they really got that figured out, which is nice. But you know, where to place those cameras, everybody has their own way of doing it. I like to put them initially on edges of fields where the deer are coming out, or pinch points on the field, so I can get an idea of what time that the deer are, you know, coming out. Or so food sources, obviously in the summertime, or if you have salt licks or mineral licks, those are huge. Come September, August, July, but the deer will get off those in October, November. They just don't hit those as much. And then I'll put some of them back in the woods on some pinch points and some travel corridors to try and see where they're coming to the food source. You know, so it kind of gives me an idea. Okay, at noon he's back in the woods. At 2 he's at this pinch point, and at 3:30 he's at this pinch point in the food plot. So I know I need to be there well before then. You know what I mean? It's just kind of reverse engineering their travel way. And sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. A lot of times you just know the deer is there, right? And you know he's back on this part of your property. It's not as scientific as what a lot of people say on these and TV hunting shows. Will be like, oh, he's coming out every day at 2:00. It's like, well, okay, I don't know. Maybe he is.
That's about as reliable
Maybe
as
he's not, you know. But
that's about as reliable as somebody shooting a giant buck on the last day of the hunt, right?
But you know, if you got 2 pictures of him back on this 80 acres, you know he's checking out that 80 acres and beyond, right? I mean,
hell yeah, dude.
Yeah.
I mean, if you even knew, I mean, back in the day when we hunted public, I mean, and we still, I mean, I don't think you're even opposed to hunting some of the public land that we hunt because it's so good. And because you know, it could be that day where in the specific area that we hunt that you could see a deer that could break the world record. I mean, it really has the opportunity of that. And, you know, I think maybe I'll save this for another podcast, but all this technology is so super badass, especially from an return on investment, not only with your money, but your pride and your ego.
Mm-hmm.
But when is it too much? All right, you know, when is it too much? We're actually going to be doing a piece on blood trailing, you know, and we're going to talk about is technology taking that art away. It can't, because it's such a Neanderthal piece of who we are as hunters, you know. I love all this stuff, and actually what I don't love about what you're doing is the fact that for the last 2 years, I've got these pictures of these deer that I would, dude, if you're listening to this podcast, you'd be like, oh, I am shooting that deer. And he's like, oh, I let these walk by today. And I'm like, are you shitting me, bro? Are you? I'm like, dude, that's a 7.5. No, he's only 3.5. Oh, dude, oh, boy, it stirs up some shit. But I just love, the thing I love about the technology piece is that we can put ourselves in a better position as a hunter, especially from a time standpoint. You know, Mike, you have to value this. I mean, as hard as you work, as many hours as you work, you're putting yourself in such a better position than going spend the weekends with me and Tristan and your dad on a public land park. You know, where
yeah, but it's still a lot of fun to hunt public land. I enjoy it, and we've talked about this too, Tony. As I've gotten older, and just in the last couple of years, even since I've gotten my own land, to me, it's less about killing and more about the hunt and the chase and the putting up the food plots and finding out where they are. And I have more fun trying to get my dad on a deer than me going in and shooting a deer. Don't get me wrong. I'd love to shoot a 200-inch deer, and someday I hopefully will. But when I started hunting, it was about killing. It was about having a good time. It was about partying, and it was all those things that it was. And there's nothing wrong with that either. But now that I get older, it's more about figuring it out, right? I want to be the one that figures it out, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Whether or not I pull the trigger, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'd love to do that. But it could be one of my buddies, it could be my dad, it could be my wife, it could be somebody else, and I would be just as ecstatic because I put them in that situation. You know what I mean? Sure.
And I know this, you were there to be a part of 2 years of me crying, missing the most gigantic animal that I'll ever see in my life, maybe. And, but you were also there for me to shoot a 160-inch basic 8-pointer that was a 7.5-year-old deer that was the Super Bowl for me, and it all comes down to like the game you're playing, the strategy you're trying to overcome. You're trying to win the game. And I think we do it in duck hunting all the time. We talk about that, Tristan, so much about the different games, no matter where you go. It holds true with deer hunting too. And this is a great example of that versus this. You're basically trying to outsmart one of the most intelligent animals in the forest. I mean, you are. I mean, they are.
And there's so much of that, even with cameras and food plots. There's so much of that is just absolute luck.
It is.
So I mean, it. Don't get me wrong. It's nice to have trail cameras of deer, but it's like, oh yeah, this is the day he's going to be here. He's been here 3 days ago. He was here, and last week he was here. And it's Thursday. Last Thursday he was here, and then you show up and there ain't no deer around you. You know what I mean? So it's like it's just tough, and you have to be lucky on top of it all. So and you have to have the time. I mean, if it's like the biggest thing that I've learned in probably 25 years, 30 years of hunting, especially during the rut, is the best way to increase your chance of killing the deer you want is by sitting in your tree stand as many hours as you possibly can.
Great point. Nothing beats
all day long, mornings, afternoons, evenings, middays. I mean, the biggest deer I ever shot was on public land when you shot that 12-pointer. And the next day I shot that 12-pointer day before you did. I think I had him scored. He's right at 160, but that deer, I shot him at 1:00 in the afternoon.
Yep. Yep.
And I saw him that morning all day long chasing doe about 80, 100 yards away from me. And then I lost him, and they bedded down somewhere over there, 150 yards away. And I actually snuck out of the woods to eat lunch with my dad. We had, we sat at a base of a tree about 200 yards from our stand, ate lunch, snuck back in 12:45, and I had this splitting headache. I'm like, shit, I need to go back to the truck, 2-mile walk out to get some ibuprofen. I didn't think I was going to make it. And I almost got down, and sure enough, here he come running, chasing a doe, 1:00 in the afternoon, shot him 8 yards from my tree. And, it's just luck, especially during that was chase.
Tristan actually put this on the outline, and this is a great funny thing about this all is Bill, his dad, said, "There ain't no 12-pointers on this public land." And
that morning we're walking out, it's dark out, it's cold, it's freezing. We had a cold front come in. I was like, I'm gonna shoot a 12-pointer today. And I was like, there ain't no fucking 12-pointers out here. What are you talking about?
And what happened?
We haven't seen a 12-pointer in 3 years. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? I was like, okay, all right, let's see.
We will see.
Sure enough, 1 o'clock, that night we're dragging out a 12-pointer. It's 155, 160 inches, and then the next day you go and put the smack down on another 12-pointer.
And Charlie shot a 12-pointer.
Yeah.
There's 3 12-pointers shot in a 48-hour
And that
period.
that was all within Charlie and I stand isn't too far from each other. It's probably only 300 or 400 yards away from each other, and yours is probably 500 or 600. So within, I don't know, a square mile or two, there were at least 3 12-pointers that day.
And dude, that was so bittersweet. So next time we hunt together, I want your dad to say that there's no 20-pointers.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Because I want a 20-pointer. But dude, no, man. So check it out. What I think would be cool is if we talk about it now and then talk about it later in season, because y'all, like I said before, we're going to have Mike back. We want to progress through the season so you can kind of see what he's doing and why he's doing it. And we might talk to him. He said, well, it's been 2 weeks. I've only been out and staying one time. Why is that? Or whatever, right?
Sure.
Do you have a target? Is there that buck that you got pictures of from last year or now or whatever that you're like, dude, that's the one?
This year has been all screwed up because we had a dry summer and I have no corn and beans. And I'm going up there this week. I'm planting my fall plots and I'm going to have 3, 6, probably 9 or 10 acres of green plots in. So they should start moving a little bit more, but I'm only getting pictures of does, fawns. I got some small bucks. I got a decent 8-pointer that's probably, 110, 120 inches. I got a big old spike that's probably a world-class spike. But, he's probably got 14-inch spikes, but other than that, he's just a little turd buck. But I don't have any giants yet, but I've only had my cameras out for about 5 or 6 days. So it's early yet. Mm-hmm. I'm late this year because I've been so busy. But, there's last year and the year before, there was the big deer that I was hunting. I had some nice, 10-pointers, 140, 150 inch, probably one that was probably 155, 160 inch 10-pointer. And then that second week of October is when, second and third week of October is when my big deer came on my property. I didn't have any summer pics of them. So I'm hoping this year is a similar story. But, I'll gladly give you guys updates and kind of go over things and see where we're at with everything,
Awesome stuff. Tristan?
Yeah, no, that sounds great, and definitely looking forward to keeping up with the journey as the season progresses. It's been interesting just from afar the last 3 years or so, just checking in with you throughout the year, and just seeing what you're seeing,
And y'all, if you're listening to this podcast and you got more questions and you're like, dude, I want to know what Mike does in this situation or why he did this, and you guys didn't drill down about that, and I really want to know more about that, dude, shoot us a message on Instagram, on Facebook, or whatever platform you use, and we'll definitely, we're real here. We'll reach out to Mike and just say, hey, and Mike will get back to us, and we'll help you out.
For sure.
Yeah. And we should, in future podcasts, maybe tear into, one subject a little deeper, like food plots or how to do TSI, like what type of trees to look for, that type of stuff. So
for sure.
If you guys have any, questions on more detail on anything we kind of brushed over, then just let us know. We'll do what we can to answer them.
Yeah,
okay?
we're definitely smashing as much into this podcast as we could, for sure.
So. We've got so much more, and you guys, Mike, I'm forcing this on him, and he hasn't done it yet. I can guarantee it. But I told him, I said, go get this Instagram for Dr. Buck so that we can all follow the journey. And if I got to go get the damn thing and then just manage it for you, then I might just do that. But this is why we call him Dr. Buck. If you've listened to this podcast, by the end of it, you know that he's for sure a doctor. And number two, he takes the same approach to hunting. And I think he's truly the Dr. Buck of it. And, man, we appreciate you so much, dude. You know how much we love you as a friend, and I love your family, and I hope everything's going great with everybody. And my God, there's nobody I'd rather hunt with. Outside of the guys sitting across the table from me.
Hey, let's go hunting.
That's right. Let's go hunting.
Man.
That goes all the way back. You know why Michael says that? We had
Jerry Dale used to say that all the time.
Yep,
you know?
but we had his dad had 5 VHS buck hunting tapes that we used to watch. And if you're going through Walmart, sometimes you get a Hunter Specialties one with your grunt call or whatever it was. And this one guy would always say, "Hey, let's go hunt." And so me and Mike it was just like embossed in our brain, because you'd fall asleep to this guy going, "Hey, let's go hunt."
And that alarm clock would come too early, and then it was time to go hunting.
That's right. That's right. But y'all, Mike, thanks again. I know you're a super busy guy with all the kids and the practice and everything else, man. We'll get you back on here, and I can't wait till next time we go out and walk in the woods together.
All right, guys, take care.
I've been southbound, I've been hellbound, riding on the midnight train. Going too fast now, think I ought to slow down, standing in the pouring rain.